Team Ineos took the decision not to race until what should have been next weekend's Volta Catalunya. Spain is, of course, now on lockdown, so the Volta has been postponed. We know that the E3 Bink Bank Classic has been postponed. Again, Wevelgem has been postponed. No San Remo.
Flanders at this stage, do we know?
Tour of Flanders likely to be postponed for the first time in 100 years.
Roubaix as well.
Yeah. So the list goes on. The Giro, we know about the women's tour in June. We know about now. So Sweet Spot have acted early to postpone that. So none of us is an expert on the coronavirus, COVID-19. No, we can though talk about it from a sporting point of view, and we can talk about the likely impact that it will have, or the impact that it's already having on the peloton. So Matt, just start us off with this, because I think as much as the one-day classics have begun to fall by the wayside, if we're looking at the Giro, which is the real big casualty of the season, if you like, so far, could we be looking at, for example, a Giro in the autumn?
Quite possibly, and it's important that you stress the word speculate, because that's all we're doing at the moment. Because this situation is changing daily. It is fluid, and it is totally and utterly unprecedented in our lifetimes. You put into context the fact that Flanders has never been cancelled in 100 years. Just shows you,
including the war years, isn't it?
Yeah, including the war years. This is something that that clearly transcends cycling. And I think we said, Graham, before we came on air, actually, that it seems almost bizarre that we and unimportant that we still are here to talk about cycling. And we are, because it's our world, and we cherish it, and it means a lot to us. But within the grand scheme of things, cycling is relatively insignificant. It's the welfare of people that are at the forefront of all this. But for the cycling calendar, it's more than disruptive. Organisations, race organisers, primarily going to be losing money. Teams have got no exposure for their investment, and then it's just. And I think, had this been a set of circumstances that said, okay, the calendar's locked down for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you can, to a degree, manage that because you can reschedule. But because this is constantly moving and evolving, and because there's no real coordination amongst governance, we're talking about the UCI, we're talking about the IOC, we're talking about race organisers, we're talking about teams, we're talking about governments. There's no real coordination. This thing could go on and on and on, and it's this uncertainty that is the most frightening thing at the moment for race organisers. I'd like to think, not being a medic or anything, I'd like to think we could have a Giro at the end of the year. There's even people on Twitter quite fancifully talking about having a combined Grand Tour, like a week in Spain, a week in Italy, and a week in France. Who knows? But the longer this goes on, the more precarious a position the Giro is going to be in, than the knock-on effect to the Tour and the Vuelta, because we just don't know.
Brad, as Matt says, cycling is beyond question the most important of the least important things, if you like. From your point of view, have you spoken to any of the riders in the peloton? Have you? How about?
No, I spoke to Cav last week.
Yeah.
And he was just about to travel down to Nice to do some training. He'd been training quite hard in preparation for this season. Of course, you know how big a year this was going to be for him, coming back with Bahrain, and really wanted to make a point and make a statement. And I think it's frustrating from an athletic point of view for the likes of Cav, because this was a big year for him, and of course we all know what his race is at the Tour de France and coming back there. I mean, can you imagine after last year not making the Tour de France? So from a personal sporting aspect and personal kind of goals and things from someone like Mark Cavendish, it's going to be a shame if something like this disrupts his opportunity. As we said, as it's at least important compared to other things in life, but just from the amount of work and hard work. These guys have put in work all through the winter in preparation for certain goals that are now being moved. And if something like the Tour de France, God forbid, was to go, at the expense of this virus, then for someone like Mark Cavendish, who's the only one I've spoken to, it'll be a great shame for the amount of work he's putting, because this is still their livelihoods. We keep saying it's only sport, but for these guys, the financial implications for the sponsors and teams, this could be devastating for a lot of them, couldn't it?
Yeah, massively. And I think teams are having to be relatively creative now. I mean, and I'm going to mention it because it's quite interesting. Yesterday I spoke to Simon Yates via Skype at his home in Andorra, and Andorra is one of the places that's locked down. Spain, we know you can't even go on your bike now.
Are they not allowed to go out? No.
I don't know about Andorra. I think they can ride in Andorra, but in Spain, you're not allowed to ride your bike as of midnight at the time this was recorded last night.
Really?
The government said you can't ride.
Is that the same in Italy? Is that, do we know?
In certain areas.
Italy's on lockdown, yeah.
Wow.
So in Spain, it will be. So I've got a mate in Madrid, and it's supermarket and pharmacy runs only.
Yeah, so
But,
it's incredible. But Mitchelton Scott, have got a lot of investment from from Mitchelton, of course. So they've created this Where the World Rides series, so the riders can train together using Zwift as the platform, and fans can ride with them as well. So doing a series of events over the week. And I spoke to Matt Heyman this morning about it, and he said, this has thrown us into disarray. We don't know what the future holds this season. I think we can see beyond, and hopefully this will become contained at some point, and we will get back to some semblance of normality, but we don't know when that's going to be yet. So we're in this constant state of flux, and for riders, sponsors, it's this uncertainty. So riders are just basically, they're now stopping training, and they're just riding their bikes because they don't want to peak too much until they know exactly what their objectives are. There's no point in riding for nothing. But they are riding on Zwift to basically keep the name of the brand out there because there's big investment. And as Brad pointed out, you've got these personal objectives which are being upset, but also teams have put millions of euros into these teams, and at the moment they're getting nothing back. And but it's a problem. I mean, you can see 20% has been wiped off the Nikkei, the Dow Jones, and the one in London. Forgot what the stock exchange. So there's people losing money everywhere, and cycling, of course, isn't immune to that. So it's about people thinking laterally during some very, very difficult times.
Can I put you to sort of take you back to your own days in the peloton? How would you feel now, do you think, if you were, for example, asked to ride this week at Paris-Nice? So if you weren't in one of the teams that had taken the decision not to put their riders out there, Mitchelton Scott or Ineos or Movistar, how would you feel about it, do you think?
Well, I mean, I would have ridden, I mean, the last time I remember anything like this through cycling was probably in the early 2000s, although this wasn't something that affected humans, but was the foot and mouth.
Yeah.
Lots of races started getting cancelled, didn't they, because of the spread of that through farms and things. But from this point of view, I mean, I would have probably ridden, really. I mean, you'd hope that the teams would take those decisions, really. So Mitchelton obviously took that decision for the riders, really. And I think that's where the teams and the medical and the science, the people that can come together and put factual stuff out there, and whether they decide to put those riders at a risk for the sake of kind of their sponsors, and whether we have a team next year or not, because the sponsor was already considering pulling out. You'd hope that your team would make the right decision, really, and you'd go on that.
I think I'm the same as Brad. I'd be advised because I'm sure. Well, some riders have gone on social media to state they weren't particularly happy at riding. Roman Bardet was one of the riders, but then Max Schachmann, of course, recently won Paris-Nice and is cock a hoop, although the race was curtailed by one stage. So I think you can read into that Bardet's form was average. So he could say, well, I wasn't really happy riding, but he was under team instructions. And I think most riders, from what I've seen, are happy to do what they're told by their team because, and there was an interesting one. And Jonathan Walters, the manager of EF, originally wasn't going to ride Paris-Nice, and they did a complete 180, and the team rode. Although they're a very depleted team, and obviously Higuita did a superb ride. But I think you're just going to have to be led by the medical expertise in your team, and I think that's what most riders have done. Some reluctantly, some have just towed the line. And Jumbo-Visma were another team who stopped riding altogether.
That's quite a nice Bardet quote, actually, when he said, when nothing really makes sense anymore, you might as well get caught up in the ambient madness and do the things you like to do. I didn't understand why the race, and he's talking about Paris-Nice here, I didn't understand why the race went on today, so this is the finish of stage 6. We seem out of place on a bike when everyone is making efforts to stem the spread of the virus.
Yeah, he's got a point, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. I think it's fair play.
Eloquently put as well.
He's a bit of a poet, is our Roman, isn't he, as well? He's a very well-spoken young chap.
But no, I think he had a point there, really. I mean, but to be fair, it has escalated every day, isn't it? And I think it's got to the point now where they did, cancel the last stage, really. But it did seem odd that with everything else going, and Italy, the crisis in Italy at the moment, and just the amount of outpouring of love for Italy, that we were going very close to there in Nice with a massive bike race, almost celebrating that when, this thing is getting quite serious all around. There's no toilet roll anymore anywhere. There's no paracetamol.
No pasta.
And this massive bike race is going on in France.
All the things that cycling depends on.
Exactly.
So one more for you chaps. Given that you've seen the teams taking the decision before before Cycling's Authority, so before the UCI. So it was Mitchelton Scott that almost began that sort of chain of events that forced the UCI to start to think about, okay, well maybe we need to, and it wasn't even the UCI. It was you're talking about the Belgian government, or you're talking about the French government, or you're talking about the Spanish government.
I do understand the UCI's position to a degree.
A bit like the Premier League's going, and those things. It's like you sort of, why did Paris-Nice ever go ahead, really? When already we'd lost. The race, on across Trainer Ajak and teams like that,
Well, I think the weird anomaly before we leave this particular subject was the fact that the French government has said there's no more sporting events, but somehow, Paris-Nice managed to get 6 days.
So there were no crowds, and so by the time stage 6 was,
they were stopped from going. They were sealed off at the start and finish. So there's no people.
To just add a little bit of detail on the end there, the reason the peloton was able to get underway on stage 6 was because there were fewer than 100 riders starting the race that morning. And that was the day after the French government had said no gatherings of 100 people or more.
Wow.
So it was almost on a technicality
so the small
that it was allowed to start. Yeah.
There we go.